From the very first moment I held Talia in my arms, slick with newness and wrapped in a cry that shattered me in the best way, I made two silent promises. I didn't say them out loud, not to her mother, not to the nurses in that delivery room, not even to myself in full sentences, but they took root somewhere deep. I would love her, and I would show up. Always. No matter the weather, no matter the distance, no matter what her mother and I became after the ink dried on the divorce papers. Those promises became the rails I lived on, the unshakable things. And somehow, through the messy middle of custody schedules and tight weekends and lonely holidays, I kept them. I was there when she lost her first tooth. I was there when she learned how to tie her shoelaces, even though Harper insisted I was teaching her the wrong loop method. I drove through snowstorms just to make it to her Christmas pageants, even when I had to sit in the back row beside the janitor's mop bucket. I held her hand after her wisdom teeth were pulled and stayed up late editing her college application essays. I knew her Starbucks order better than mine. Even when Harper remarried and Malcolm entered the picture, I stayed in my lane and showed up. There was no contest. I didn't try to compete. I didn't need to. I was her father. So when Talia got engaged, she called me first. Not Harper. Not Malcolm. Me. I still remember the sound of her voice bubbling through the phone, joy layered with nerves. "Dad," she said, "I want your help planning the wedding." I said yes before she even finished the sentence. It wasn't about the money. It was the invitation to participate, to be seen. She didn't ask for a checkbook. She asked for my presence. That meant something to me. The venue? I handled it. Toured 5 locations and booked the one she fell in love with before she even walked in the door. The catering? I was on it. I called in favors, sampled menus, negotiated the price down and threw in a dessert table shaped like a carousel just because I remembered how much she loved those as a kid. And every time she thanked me with that wide smile of hers, the one that tilted up just like mine, I felt full, useful, whole. It wasn't just about planning a wedding. It was about being part of her life in a way that felt solid, permanent. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't on the sidelines. I wasn't a bi-weekly call or a split holiday obligation. I was her dad, and she was letting the world see it. Harper was around. Of course, she always had a way of making herself central, but I let that slide. I wasn't doing this for Harper. I wasn't even doing it for show. I was doing it because I believed in that walk down the aisle, that moment when I'd get to stand beside her, take her arm, and give her away, not because I owned her, but because I had raised her, loved her, and earned that step. That small ceremony of recognition meant everything to me. It was the culmination of years of consistency, of sacrifice, of biting my tongue when Harper made me look like a footnote in Talia's story. I remember the first planning session, just the two of us. We sat at that little Italian place near her old high school, the one where she used to beg for lasagna and extra breadsticks. She had her laptop open, tabs loaded with wedding inspiration, Pinterest boards in soft pinks and sage greens. "You've always had good taste," she said, scribbling notes, sipping lemonade, calling me her planning MVP. I grinned like an idiot. My chest puffed a little. Not because I was doing anything spectacular, but because she noticed. I was being seen, finally, not just as a background parent or a funding source, but as a piece of her heart. We joked about her flower girl tripping, about how I'd better not cry when I gave the toast. She promised I'd get the first father-daughter dance, no matter what. I believed her. Every word. In those months leading up to the big day, I made space for her. Cleared my calendar, took calls at odd hours, helped her draft vendor emails. She called me Captain Calm when the florist delayed samples. I laughed and told her, "That's because you got all your drama from your mother." She rolled her eyes and called me ridiculous. But she smiled. That kind of smile you can't fake. That kind of smile that makes every sleepless night from her teething days worth it. I didn't know what was coming. I didn't sense it then. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I was too wrapped up in the illusion that love and consistency would finally be enough. I even bought a new suit. Navy blue, tailored. Picked out the tie she once said brought out the green in my eyes. Practiced tying it just right because I wanted to look sharp when I walked her down that aisle. That was my moment. The one I earned. Not with grand gestures, but with steady ones. With quiet arrivals, check-ins, and unwavering yes. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't need applause. I just wanted the honor. Just wanted to hold her hand, hear the music swell, and feel her lean into me like she did when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. I didn't know then that a storm was coming, and it wasn't the kind that left puddles or snapped tree limbs. It was the kind that arrived in whispers and compromise. It was the kind that would turn everything I thought I secured into dust. But at that moment, at that dinner, during those months of shared plans and shared laughter, I believed in the promise I made long ago. I'll love you. And I'll show up. I never thought I'd have to choose between the two. Harper always had a way of getting into people's heads. That was her gift, her weapon, her game. She didn't shout. She didn't confront. She whispered. And when she whispered, people leaned in without realizing their spine was being removed. I'd seen her do it 1,000 times before, to friends, coworkers, even strangers in line at a grocery store. I used to think it was charming, strategic. Now I knew better. So when she started hovering around the edges of Talia's wedding planning, I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how quiet it would be. It started small. A comment here, a reference there. We were sitting at the table during one of the planning meetings, going over floral arrangements, when Harper smiled and said, "You know, that vendor Malcolm used for his sister's wedding did peonies in the exact blush tone you wanted. He knows them well." And that was it. Not a jab, not a correction, just a gentle redirection. The kind of thing no one else would notice unless you'd lived with her long enough to know when she was setting traps. I stayed quiet. I wasn't going to spar with her in front of Talia. It was Talia's day, her moment. I told myself that over and over, like a prayer. But Harper kept going. And she knew just how to make her voice blend into the fabric of the room, present, persistent, but never loud enough to be accused of being manipulative. She'd lean over, touch Talia's arm lightly, and say things like, "Malcolm really stepped in during the tough years, didn't he? Especially when your dad had that project in Seattle." She always chose her moments carefully, when I had just walked back into the room or was halfway through offering a suggestion. The implication was never spoken outright. That was Harper's genius. She didn't need to lie, she just needed to distort the light until the shadow looked like the truth. I'd show up, smile, offer my thoughts on centerpieces, playlists, timelines, and she'd be there, shadowing every suggestion with a faint echo of Malcolm's supposed contributions. "Oh, Malcolm already mentioned that," she'd say with a little laugh. Or, "That's exactly what Malcolm was thinking too." As if to imply I was an afterthought, a tag-along to decisions already made. At first, I brushed it off. I figured Talia could see through it, that she'd remember who booked the venue, who paid the deposits, who showed up, who always showed up. But something shifted in her eyes each time Harper spoke. A flicker of something I couldn't name. Doubt? Guilt? Or was it just exhaustion? We were 3 weeks out from the wedding when I really started to feel it. The shift. Talia used to call me every other day with updates, decisions, random panics over napkin textures or chair colors. But now, days would go by. Then a short message. "Hey Dad, Mom said you're good with the cake vendor?" I was. I'd already paid the deposit. But that wasn't the point. It was that she was checking with Harper before checking with me. Like I was a backup. A bank account. A good soldier. Harper even started attending vendor meetings without me. I'd show up to a scheduled tasting only to find out it had been moved. "Oh, sorry," Talia would say. "Mom and Malcolm were nearby, so they just went instead. I didn't think you'd mind." I minded. Of course I did. But I didn't say anything. Because I kept hearing that voice in my head again. Talia's voice, that day she asked me to help plan. "I want you involved, Dad." And I clung to that. I clung to it like it was life support, even as everything around me started pulling away. I told myself to be patient. That maybe I was being sensitive. That maybe Harper wasn't trying to edge me out. Maybe Malcolm was just helping. Maybe this was what co-parenting looked like when the stakes were high and the spotlight was on. But deep down, I knew better. I knew Harper. And I knew that smile she wore when she was winning, tight, polite, satisfied. She had it on every time I walked into a room she had just left. And every time I tried to bring it up with Talia, she'd wave it off. "Dad, please, don't make this a thing. I just want the wedding to be smooth. You both matter." That word, both, burned more than it soothed. Then came the rehearsal seating chart. I noticed something off. My name was there, but not beside Talia's for the processional. Malcolm's was. I didn't say anything right away. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the planner didn't know. Maybe it was just a placeholder. But it nagged at me. And Harper noticed. She always noticed. That night, she came over to the car while I was helping load some favors into the trunk. She leaned on the frame like we were old friends, like there hadn't been years of sharp words and blame between us. "You've done a lot, you know," she said. "Really stepped up. And I know Talia appreciates it." I nodded, unsure of what angle she was playing. Then she tilted her head. But some moments, some roles, they change. Malcolm's been there in ways you haven't. Emotionally. Consistently. Don't take it personally. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about cake vendors or floral choices. It was about rewriting the narrative. About shifting me from presence to background. I was being managed out. And worse, Talia didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did. And she just didn't want to admit it. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. The silence was loud. My hands were still sticky with packing tape and glitter from the favor bags. And all I could think about was the promise I made when she was born. That I would show up. Always. But no one tells you what to do when showing up stops being enough. She brought the bottle like it was a peace offering. But I knew better. You don't bring Merlot to your father's house on a Thursday night unless you're trying to soften something sharp. I opened the door, and there she was, Talia, my daughter, my shadow, my heart. She had her jacket slung over one arm, a nervous half-smile on her lips, and eyes that couldn't stay on mine for more than 3 seconds at a time. "Hey, Dad," she said. I stepped aside, and she came in like she didn't want to, like the air in the room already carried the words she didn't want to say. We sat in the living room. The wine was opened, glasses poured. I pretended I couldn't feel the shift, but it sat between us like a third person, bigger than the couch, heavier than the Merlot. "This is good," I said, swirling the glass. She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I thought you'd like it." Her hands fidgeted on the stem of the glass, twisting it slowly, like it might deliver her courage. I waited. I always did. I'd learned a long time ago that when it came to Talia, silence was often the only way to invite the truth out. She took a sip, exhaled, and then finally met my eyes. "Dad, I don't want you to be upset." The way she said it, that cautious, preemptive kindness, was the first cut. I didn't speak, just looked at her. She set the glass down on the coffee table, her fingers trembling slightly. "We've decided Malcolm should walk me down the aisle." I didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just let the words settle. Let them echo in the hollow space where expectation used to live. My heart didn't break right away, it paused, like it needed time to register the blow. "We," she said. Not I. Not I've decided. That distinction told me everything. It told me Harper had whispered her way into Talia's head completely. It told me Malcolm had accepted a role that wasn't his to even consider. And it told me that my daughter, the same one I'd raised on bedtime stories and emergency room visits, the one who called me every time she needed steady ground, had redrawn the lines. Without me. I nodded. That's all I could do. If I spoke then, I wouldn't have been able to control what came out. She kept talking, filling the space with justification, as if reason could undo betrayal. "It's symbolic," she said. "It'll keep the peace. Everyone expects it." Mom said. I stopped listening. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. Because if I let myself hear any more, I would have shattered. Instead, I watched her mouth move and thought about the first time I taught her how to ride a bike. How her knees were scraped raw that summer because she refused to quit. How she screamed, "Don't let go." And I didn't, not until she was ready. I thought about the time she broke her arm on the monkey bars and how she begged me not to cry in front of the doctor because she was trying to be brave. I thought about Christmas mornings and bad breakups and the college move-in day when she gripped me so tightly I couldn't breathe. Now she was sitting across from me, rewriting history with a glass of wine and a practiced smile. "I'm happy for you," I said finally. The words tasted like copper. I forced the corners of my mouth up. "Really?" She searched my face, looking for something. Pain, maybe, or understanding. I gave her neither. I gave her peace. Because that's what she said she wanted. "You're not mad?" she asked. I shook my head. "Of course not. It's your day." But inside, I wasn't just breaking, I was disappearing. Slowly. Quietly. As if all the years of showing up had been erased by a few weeks of someone else being convenient. I didn't argue. Didn't ask her to reconsider. Didn't remind her who stayed up through every fever, who packed lunches with notes tucked inside, who cheered the loudest at her recitals when only one name was on the emergency contact list. I didn't tell her that love isn't a performance you hand off to the highest bidder. I didn't guilt her. Because I knew what would happen if I did. Harper would twist it, Malcolm would shrug, and Talia would fold further into the fog they'd made for her. So I stayed quiet. And in that silence, something inside me went still. We sat a while longer, pretending to enjoy the wine. I asked her about the music playlist. She told me she changed the song for the father-daughter dance. I said that made sense. She said she hoped I understood. I told her I did. But that was a lie. Not because I didn't grasp the words, but because I didn't recognize the person saying them. This wasn't my daughter. Not the girl I raised. This was someone molded by guilt and suggestion and the comfort of choosing the path of least resistance. She hugged me before she left. It was awkward. Her arms were loose, uncertain, like she didn't know where to hold me. I didn't return it right away. When I did, it was brief. A pat on the back. A fatherly gesture. But it felt like goodbye. When the door closed behind her, I sat in the quiet and stared at the bottle of wine. Half full. Still breathing. I poured another glass, but I didn't drink it. I just watched it. The deep red swirl of it. And I thought about what it meant to be a father. How no one warns you that sometimes your biggest heartbreak won't come from leaving. It'll come from being left behind. I had always shown up. And now, I was a guest to be managed. A placeholder. An obligation to be navigated. She wanted Malcolm to walk her down the aisle. Fine. That was her choice. But that day, as I sat there, something shifted. I realized I wasn't Talia's father anymore, not in the way I had been. I was no longer central. No longer needed. I wasn't the man she leaned on when the world tilted. I was the man she thanked politely and kept at arm's length. That night, I stopped being her anchor. That night, I became a footnote. She still called. Still used my name like it meant something. Hey, Dad, she'd say over the phone, bright and easy, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't handed my role, the role I earned with every year of presence, to someone else. I answered. I always did. But I started to notice how her calls sounded different now. Lighter, more curated. She wasn't calling to hear my thoughts anymore. She was calling to confirm logistics. Napkin colors. Cake stands. She'd text photos of floral arrangements and say, which one looks more elegant? Like I was still at the table, still part of it all. But I wasn't. I was on the outside of the glass, fogging it with breath, pretending not to notice the cold. The worst part? She still used my card. That stung more than I thought it would. I saw the charges roll in like waves. Boutiques with names I didn't recognize, invoices from stylists, decorators, and a makeup trial that cost more than my first car payment. I didn't cancel it. Not then. Because a small, ridiculous part of me hoped that maybe this was her way of staying close, keeping me tethered to the day, even if my feet wouldn't touch the aisle. I convinced myself I was still contributing, still fathering, still showing up. But the illusion started to crack the day we had brunch. It was a Saturday, crisp and overcast, and we met at that little cafe near her apartment, one we used to go to when she was home from college. She wore a soft beige coat and had that pre-wedding glow people always talk about. I tried to match her smile, though mine felt like it was stitched on with thread that could snap if I moved wrong. We ordered pancakes, split a side of fruit like old times. She chatted about seating charts and custom signage. I nodded, let her words fill the silence. Then, casually, like she was mentioning the weather, she said, "Oh, Malcolm's been practicing the walk with me. He's really sweet about it." Gets teary-eyed even. My fork stopped mid-tap on the plate. The sound of metal on porcelain was sharp, final. She froze, eyes darting to mine, as if she realized too late what she'd just said. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My stomach churned with something bitter, and my throat closed around a knot I hadn't expected to rise. I looked at her, really looked. Not just at her face, but at her, the woman she'd become, the woman I helped raise. And what I saw wasn't cruelty. It was detachment. Guilt, maybe, but not regret. I set my fork down gently. "You didn't have to tell me that," I said, voice even. "Or maybe you did." She blinked. "Dad, I didn't mean it like." "I know," I said. "It's fine." But it wasn't. It was the opposite of fine. It was the coldest realization I'd had since this whole thing began. She didn't want me to understand. She wanted me to disappear quietly. The calls, the updates, the financial strings, they weren't connections. They were convenience. She still wanted my involvement, just not my presence. And that was the moment it clicked. I wasn't family. Not anymore. I was a sponsor. The realization landed with the weight of years. Every holiday missed, every work trip I rescheduled, every birthday surprise, suddenly it all felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Because in the version she was building now, I was just the man who made things easier. Not warmer. Not better. Just easier. She didn't want my voice at the toast, or my hand on her arm, or my footsteps beside hers. She wanted my account number and my silence. That's what I was now. Silent. Funded. Forgotten. The rest of brunch passed in shallow conversation. I nodded in the right places, paid the bill, and hugged her goodbye. She squeezed me tightly, like she still believed the performance. I didn't squeeze back. I let it happen, then let her go. I watched her walk away, coat flaring behind her like some kind of veil, and I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out the last part of me that believed I mattered in the way fathers are supposed to. I went home and sat in the living room with the receipts. Literally. I pulled out the wedding folder I'd kept, contracts, emails, itemized payments. Each one had been carefully planned, reviewed, and executed by me. And each one was attached to a day I wasn't welcome at. I ran my fingers over the pages like a man touching relics from a past life. This wasn't just about money. This was about meaning, about what it meant to be part of something, and what it meant to be discarded. I thought of calling her, thought of asking if she understood what she was doing. But I didn't, because by then, I realized the truth wasn't hidden. It was spoken, plain and casual. She didn't even flinch when she told me Malcolm had taken my place. Because to her, it wasn't a betrayal, it was a convenience. And I wasn't supposed to object. I was supposed to keep nodding, keep paying, keep loving quietly from the distance she'd assigned me. But I'm not built like that. I never have been. So that night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat on the back porch, watching the wind rattle the leaves. And I made a new promise, one just for me this time. If I couldn't be part of the memory, I wouldn't be the one funding it. If I wasn't welcome as her father, I wasn't going to continue as her financier. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood that love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. It means knowing when to stop giving to people who only remember you when it's time to swipe a card. That was the night I stopped lying to myself. I wasn't part of her day. I was just paying for it. It came at 9:36 p.m., a Tuesday night that had no business holding any kind of weight. I remember the exact moment because I had just set down my coffee. Not whiskey, not wine, just a cup of decaf, the kind I brewed when I was trying to convince myself I still slept like a man at peace. I was halfway through a documentary I wasn't really watching, the glow of the television casting shadows across the living room. My phone lit up, and instinctively, I reached for it. Talia's name. No emojis. No exclamation points. Just a message so flat, so fragile, that I had to read it twice to believe it wasn't a hallucination. Hey Dad, Mom thinks it might be best if you didn't attend the wedding. That was it. A sentence built like a paper cut. Barely a wound at first, but sharp enough to keep bleeding every time I breathed. My thumb hovered over the screen, heart thudding slow and hollow against my ribs. The first instinct was confusion. The second was denial. Surely this wasn't what she meant. Surely this was Harper speaking, not her. Surely she'd follow it with a, "but I don't agree," or "we can talk." But no second message came. No typing dots. Just stillness. Just that one sentence hanging in the blue light like a verdict. I didn't reply. Not right away. I placed the phone face down and stared at the coffee. Suddenly it looked ridiculous. Who drinks decaf when their daughter is uninviting them from her life's biggest moment? Who sits in slippers and watches documentaries when their title father is being quietly deleted in real time? I tried to stand, but my legs didn't want to. I wasn't paralyzed. Just stunned. Like someone had reached inside and unplugged the part of me that knew how to react. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I don't know. I picked the phone back up and reread the message. Word for word. I turned off the TV, sat there in the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the house settling, and thought about the absurdity of it all. I'd planned this wedding, paid for it, answered calls at midnight when she panicked about vendors, showed up to tastings, gave opinions, backed off when asked, showed up again when she called. And now this? A digital exile? A single sentence written like I was being disinvited from a mailing list? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the message replaying on loop. The phrasing killed me. Mom thinks. Not, I think. Not, I feel. And yet she was the one sending it. That meant she'd accepted it, co-signed it, pressed send. Somewhere in that timeline, she had the chance to say no, to defend me, to say he's my father. But she didn't. She passed along Harper's decree like a messenger too spineless to remove herself from the chain of command. And somehow that made it worse. The next day, I called her. Not to fight, not to demand, just to ask the one question that was tearing through me like a nail through drywall. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Dad," she said, like it was a normal day. I didn't greet her back. I went straight to it. "Do you want me there?" Silence. On the other end, I heard her breath hitch, heard her swallow. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, small, but it was everything. That hesitation was louder than any scream could have been. Talia, I said, gently. Don't answer for her. Just answer for you. Another pause. Then she said, I just want it to go smoothly. That was her answer. I didn't need more. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for her to feel the weight of what she'd said. And then I gave her the only word I had left. Okay. Just that. No bitterness. No drama. No cracked voice. Just that one syllable that meant, I heard you. I see where I stand. I accept it. I ended the call. I didn't wait for her to try and salvage it. Because she wouldn't. She couldn't. She'd already made her choice, and I refused to beg for a seat at a table where my presence had become a liability. After I hung up, I stared out the window. The sky was gray. Not stormy. Not beautiful. Just gray, the kind of color that doesn't demand attention but seeps into your bones all the same. That was the moment it all unraveled. Not in some explosive way. Not with screaming or broken dishes or dramatic goodbyes. Just quietly. Like thread being pulled from a sweater you wore every day until it fell apart in your hands. I sat back down at the table and looked around. Everything was still in place. The wedding folder. The fabric swatches. The guest list spreadsheet I printed. The pen I used to sign off on the DJ. All the work I had done. All the care I had poured into a day that now had no room for me. And what stung the most wasn't just the rejection. It was the fact that it came so effortlessly. So clean. As if cutting me out was a practical decision, not an emotional one. As if I were a wrinkle to be ironed out. A complication to be resolved. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. What I felt was deeper than anger. It was grief. Grief for a version of fatherhood I thought I had secured. Grief for a relationship I thought was unshakable. And grief for the little girl who used to run into my arms like I was the only safe place in the world. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat with the truth. A heavy, bitter truth that didn't ask for validation. I didn't deserve this, not after everything. But life doesn't always hand out what we deserve. Sometimes it just hands you a quiet Tuesday night and a message that rewrites your entire role in your child's life. And all you can do is whisper back, okay. I woke up the next morning knowing exactly what I needed to do. Not in anger, not even in sadness, just in truth. A kind of cold, undeniable truth that settled into my bones like winter frost. The kind that no longer asks questions or looks for loopholes. I'd been asked not to come to my own daughter's wedding. Not by some distant cousin or unfamiliar friend, but by Talia herself. Through silence. Through hesitation. Through that single sentence I would never forget. I just wanted to go smoothly. I understood now. Smooth meant silent. Smooth meant absent. Smooth meant me, nowhere near her aisle. Her photos, her story. I made coffee. Strong. No cream. No sugar. Just black, like the mood sitting in my chest. Then I walked into my office and pulled open the drawer where I kept the wedding binder. The one I'd built page by page since the day she first asked me to help. I set it down on the desk, opened it, and stared at the contracts I'd signed. My name was on every one. The venue, the catering, the DJ, the florist, the tent rental for the outdoor reception, the lights, the linens, the monogrammed dinner menus. My signature, my money, my effort. All because she asked. All because I loved her. All because I believed I belonged there. But love doesn't require silence. And I wasn't going to fund an event I was unwelcome at. I started with the venue. I called the coordinator, told her I'd like to cancel the reservation at River Hollow Estate for June 22nd. She paused, clearly startled. Sir, that's your daughter's wedding, right? We're already within the final payment window. I told her I was aware. I told her I wasn't attending. She started asking questions, ones that weren't her business, but I cut her off politely. The reservation was in my name. The payment came from my account. Please proceed with the cancellation. She stuttered something about late fees and policies. I didn't flinch. Send me the final invoice. I'll take care of it. Next was the caterer, a company Talia had loved. Farm to table, bespoke menu, artisanal ingredients. I had met with them 3 times, tasted every dish, added extras to please the vegetarian cousins. Sir, is this a joke? The manager asked when I called. Not at all, I said. The event's no longer mine to support. They tried to salvage it, to offer scaled-down options or revised quotes. I declined. I won't be attending. I won't be paying. Best of luck finding a replacement client. The florist was next. Then the tent rental. Then the DJ, the lighting designer, the boutique stationer who printed the gold embossed table cards and matching thank you notes. One by one, I pulled the threads loose. There was no rage in my voice. No venom. Just the kind of calm that comes after a final decision. When I canceled the string quartet, the woman on the phone, her name was Marie, I think, asked gently, "Is everything okay?" I didn't know how to answer that, so I didn't. I just said, "Please email confirmation." I closed the binder when the last call was made. There was a pile of cancellation notices in my inbox, a mess of refund terms and late penalties and return logistics. I didn't care. I didn't cancel to hurt her. I canceled because clarity had arrived, and clarity demanded action. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't punishing. I was correcting something that had gone too far in the wrong direction. If I was no longer invited as a father, I would not remain as a wallet. I didn't post about it. Didn't rant. Didn't call Harper or leave Talia angry voicemails. I didn't need to. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about boundaries. And for the first time in a long time, I finally found mine. Because I realized showing up isn't the same as being used. I had confused the two for too long. I thought staying quiet meant strength. I thought supporting from the background meant love. But love without dignity is just devotion with a leash. That evening, I stepped out onto the porch with a glass of bourbon in my hand. The sun was starting to slip behind the trees, casting long, golden shadows across the yard. My dog, Bishop, lay curled near my feet, tail flicking lazily. The air smelled like dry earth and magnolia. I watched the birds pick at the feeder. I watched the light change. I watched nothing happen. And I felt peace. Not the celebratory kind. Not the triumphant kind. But the kind that comes after you've stopped pretending. The kind that settles in your chest when the mask slips off, and you realize you don't have to perform anymore. I wasn't preparing a speech for a wedding I wouldn't attend. I wasn't rehearsing the walk I'd been replaced in. I wasn't checking budgets or tracking shipments or hoping for a moment I'd already been edited out of. I was just sitting, existing, free. I didn't know what Harper would say when she found out. I didn't care. I didn't care if she spun it into some narrative about my ego or my inability to cope. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I wasn't even trying to be understood. I was just done. And Talia? I didn't expect a thank you. Or an apology. I didn't expect a call. She'd made her decision. I'd made mine. I imagined the silence between us would stretch long now, like a rope fraying at both ends. But I'd stopped gripping it. That was the difference. If she ever wanted to find her way back to me, she'd have to walk that path herself. I wasn't sending a map. I wasn't paying for the bridge. The sun dropped behind the trees. The porch lights flicked on automatically. I sat a little longer, finished my drink, and let the night settle. There was nothing more to cancel. Nothing more to fix. No more illusions left to cradle. The wedding was still happening. But without me, without my name, without my hands holding it up. And for the first time in months, that felt right. Harper was the first to call. I wasn't surprised. She never liked to be outmaneuvered, especially not by someone she thought she still had under control. Her number lit up my phone mid-morning while I was out back watering the rosemary bush that had somehow survived 3 winters. I let it ring twice before answering. So, she snapped. No hello. No preamble. You're really doing this? I let her words hang there for a second, let the silence stretch just long enough to take a slow breath. Already did. That threw her off. She wasn't used to me being direct. Controlled, maybe. Polite, always. But not this kind of settled. You're ruining Talia's day, she hissed, as if the sentence alone was a weapon. I smiled, just slightly. No, I said evenly, you already did that. Her silence after that was sharp, brittle. I could almost hear her clenching her jaw. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just let her sit in it, the truth that she'd never expected me to hand back the mask she tried to staple to my face. You convinced her to erase me, I continued. So I erased my name from the bill. Seems fair. You're unbelievable, she spat, and then hung up before I could reply. I stood there for a long moment afterward, phone still in my hand, the morning sun warming my back. The rosemary bush leaned slightly to the side, a few leaves yellowing at the tips. I made a mental note to trim it later. Harper's fury didn't touch me. Not anymore. Her opinion had long since lost its currency. The second call came 3 hours later. Talia. I knew it would. I knew the silence after Harper's call would be filled with hurried whispers, frantic scrambling, fingers flying over keyboards to find replacement vendors, backup venues, late bookings. I also knew they wouldn't find much, not with 2 weeks left and a budget that had just vanished. I didn't relish it. I didn't enjoy imagining their panic. But I didn't shield them from the consequences either. Dad? Her voice trembled, not with rage, but something worse, disbelief. Why are you doing this? I sat down at the kitchen table, steadying myself with one hand on the edge of the wood. I looked out the window, watching a pair of sparrows peck at crumbs on the patio. You asked me not to come, I said, not unkindly. I'm just following your lead. There was a pause, and then a sharp exhale. That's not what I meant. You know that's not it. You wanted it to go smoothly, I said, voice quiet. And I wanted to be there. We both made choices. Another pause. I could hear her starting to cry. I imagined her in the kitchen of the apartment she shared with Malcolm now, the one I'd helped her move into, carrying boxes and hanging curtains while Malcolm measured the sofa space with a smirk like he'd already claimed it all. I didn't speak into her sobs. I just waited, let her feel the air around her shift. We don't have a venue now, she said finally. Or a caterer. Or music. We're scrambling. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. Not in the sarcastic way. Not in the cruel way. I genuinely was sorry. Sorry that the weight of her decisions was finally settling on her shoulders. Sorry that it took all of this for her to even pick up the phone and acknowledge me as something more than a transaction. Everyone's angry, she whispered, her voice so small. Mom's blaming me. Malcolm's furious. I didn't respond to that. I couldn't. Because somewhere inside, I was still the man who would have done anything for her happiness. And hearing her crushed, hearing the fallout I never wanted her to feel, it still stung. But I wasn't going to step in and save it. Not this time. That weekend was supposed to be the rehearsal dinner. It ended up happening anyway, but not in the banquet hall I had reserved and paid the deposit for back in January. It happened in Malcolm's brother's backyard. I saw the photos eventually on social media, from the cousin who didn't get the memo to keep me blocked. Paper plates, folding chairs, string lights sagging under the weight of last-minute solutions. Talia wore a white summer dress instead of the custom rehearsal gown we'd ordered together over FaceTime. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I didn't post, didn't comment, didn't reach out. That Saturday evening, while they were passing around store-bought potato salad under a sagging tent, I was on my front porch. Same spot, different piece, beer in hand. Bishop curled up beside me, snoring with his nose under his paw. The grill hissed behind me, steak, medium rare, with a side of rosemary potatoes, freshly trimmed from the bush Harper's voice had interrupted days earlier. I had music playing, my music. Coltrane. The sky burned orange over the trees, and I didn't flinch. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt rooted. Not in anger, but in clarity. Let them say what they want. Let them build a new story where I was the villain. The one who abandoned the wedding. The one who made everything fall apart. But I knew better. I didn't sabotage anything. I just removed the scaffolding I had built. They were the ones who thought the structure would stand without it. The call stopped after that weekend. No texts. No updates. Not even a passive-aggressive email from Harper. And I didn't go looking. I didn't scroll through Instagram to see how it all turned out. I didn't ask my siblings if they heard anything. I didn't need to. The silence spoke for itself. I had made peace with the fact that I wouldn't be there. And more importantly, I had made peace with the man I had to become to survive it. Not vengeful. Not bitter. Just awake. So while their house of cards tumbled in slow motion, I stood in mine solid. Quiet. Unmoved. 3 days passed after the rehearsal dinner. 3 days of silence, of no calls, no texts, no last-minute attempts to fix anything. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe that was the clean break, the story already fading into their new version of events. I imagined Harper spinning a narrative of me as dramatic, selfish, difficult. I imagined Malcolm nodding in righteous agreement, calling me unstable to anyone who would listen. I thought Talia had chosen the safety of their circle and shut the door behind her. Then the letter came. It was in the stack of mail on my front porch, tucked between a power bill and a flyer for gutter repair. I knew her handwriting immediately. The same neat script from childhood birthday cards, the same looping T and Dad, from notes she used to leave on the fridge when I wasn't home, gone for a walk. Love you, Dad. My fingers hesitated. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the envelope for a long minute. My name centered perfectly, No return address, no decoration. Just plain white, with a weight that felt heavier than it should have. I sat at the kitchen table before opening it, coffee cooling beside me, sunlight spilling across the wooden broken stripes. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe a plea, maybe an apology, maybe a scream in ink. But what I got was something quieter, something more devastating. She didn't say sorry, not once, but she did say she missed me. The letter was written in her voice, not Harper's, not Malcolm's. Just hers, hesitant, conflicted, soft around the edges. She said the wedding was a disaster, that the string lights fell halfway through the reception, that the DJ canceled the day before and they had to use a playlist on someone's phone, that the food was cold, that the venue, the makeshift backyard, turned into a mud pit when it rained and 2 people slipped during the toast. But she didn't open with that. She opened with me. She wrote, "I didn't expect you to walk away." As if she truly thought I would still be there, just off to the side. As if she thought love meant being allowed to discard someone and still expect their warmth like nothing happened. As if she hadn't realized the weight of what she'd done until everything else collapsed without the foundation I provided. She talked about watching Malcolm fumble through the aisle walk. How it didn't feel like she imagined. How she felt disconnected, like she was watching her own wedding from the outside. She said, "I wanted to keep everyone happy. I didn't realize that meant losing you." That line hit harder than any accusation, because it was honest, and because I knew that feeling of trying so hard to balance everyone's comfort that you lose the one person who never made you beg for space. She didn't take full responsibility, but she also didn't try to explain it away. That mattered. She mentioned little things. Said she saw my name still listed on one of the contracts the planner forgot to update. Said she felt sick when she realized they were still using the color scheme I'd helped her pick, even after cutting me out of the ceremony. Said Harper tried to act like it was all fine, and she let her, for a while. Then she wrote, "I don't know how to fix this, or if I even can." That was the part that made me fold the letter and just sit there, hands resting on it like it might catch fire if I moved too fast. Not because she asked for forgiveness, she didn't. Not because she made excuses, she didn't do that either. But because for the first time since that awful Tuesday night text, I heard something real from her. Regret. Not performance. Not obligation. Just quiet, aching regret. And still, there were no tears in me. No fury either. Just silence. Because when you love someone that deeply, the pain doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it just sits with you like an old injury, familiar, dull, woven into your skin. I didn't rush to respond. I carried the letter around the house with me for the rest of the day, tucked into a book, folded into my pocket, placed on the counter like it was keeping watch. I reread it twice before bed. Both times, I thought about that little girl with mismatched socks who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and whisper, "I just wanted to be near you." And now here she was, older, married, riding from the middle of a storm she helped create, unsure how to get back to the quiet she'd once known in my presence. She hadn't apologized, but she'd reached, and that meant something. Still, I didn't write her back right away. Not because I was punishing her, but because I needed to know what kind of love I had left to offer and on what terms. I needed to be sure that if I opened the door again, it wouldn't be just to resume the same silence that got us here. I wouldn't go back to being the easy option, the fallback plan, the background father. That night, I set the letter on the nightstand beside me and turned off the light. I didn't dream. I just slept. And for the first time since the unraveling began, it wasn't restless. Because even though the wound was still fresh, even though the distance remained, something had shifted again. Not enough to bring me back to the aisle, but maybe enough to remind her who had always walked beside her. Even when she chose to look away. I waited 3 days before writing back. Not out of pettiness. Not to teach her a lesson. I waited because I needed my hands to stop shaking when I looked at her handwriting. I needed my thoughts to come from clarity, not pain. And I needed the version of myself who would sit down and write this to be a man I could live with. Not a father begging for a seat, not a man walled in by disappointment, but someone who loved her enough to be honest, and finally, honest enough to love himself, too. I chose the same kind of plain white stationery she'd used. No fancy paper, no dramatic cursive, just black ink and the truth. I started the way I always did when writing to her. "Hey, kiddo." 2 words that held years inside them. Band-aids, soccer cleats, late-night phone calls from dorm rooms. She was still my kiddo. That hadn't changed. But everything else had. I told her I got her letter, that I read it more than once, that it sat beside me for days, folded neatly, like it was waiting for me to find the right version of myself to respond. I said I appreciated her reaching out, that I believed her when she said she missed me. I didn't write to make her feel worse. I didn't lace it with guilt. I just spoke plainly, the way I always had when it was just us and the world was quiet. Then I told her what I'd never said, not during the planning, not during the silence, not when the text arrived like a blade in the dark. I love you, I wrote, but love doesn't mean disappearing. It was the simplest truth I had. I told her I understood why she made the choices she did, that she was pulled in all directions, trying to make peace where no one should have asked her to. That Harper had always been skilled at framing chaos as stability. That Malcolm had slipped into the gaps, offering solutions that looked like care but were more about control. But none of that excused the way I was handled. Not because I needed a spotlight, but because I'd already earned my place. And then I was erased, quietly, efficiently. I reminded her of things, not to shame her, not to make her feel small, but because sometimes memory is the only proof you have that something was real. I told her about the snowstorm when she was 7, when I drove 4 hours just to pick her up early from Harper's because the power had gone out and she was scared of the dark. I told her about the piano lessons I sat through every Tuesday for 3 years, even when she hated practicing, even when she cried on the car ride home. I told her about the parking lot outside her middle school where I used to wait in the car because she said she felt safer knowing I was close by. Even when she pretended not to see me when her friends walked past. I didn't show up because I had to, I wrote. I showed up because I loved you. Because that's what I promised. I let the words settle on the page, unadorned. I didn't list the money. I didn't mention the canceled contracts or the hours spent searching for the perfect shade of ivory for her invitations. Because this wasn't about that. It never had been. This was about something deeper. Something invisible but vital. The foundation of everything between us. Trust. Respect. A seat at the table that shouldn't have come with a price. I told her she had the right to build her life however she wanted. To choose peace. To choose Malcolm. To choose distance, even. But I wasn't going to be the background figure she could edit in or out depending on who was looking. I'd earn more than that. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency. Through presence. Through being the one person who never asked her to shrink herself. I won't chase you, I wrote. I won't beg to be tolerated. I love you, but I love myself, too. And I meant it. Every word. For too long, I'd measured my worth as a father by how much I could endure. By how often I could show up, even when it hurt. But now, I realized endurance without boundaries isn't love, it's martyrdom. And that doesn't build relationships. It just keeps the bleeding quiet. I didn't tell her what to do next. I didn't ask her to fix anything. I didn't demand a phone call or an apology or a family therapy session. I just told her the door wasn't locked, but it wasn't wide open either. It was somewhere in between, and she'd have to decide if she wanted to walk through it. I ended the letter the same way I used to sign off when she wrote me notes from camp or texted me late at night from college dorms. Always here. Always your dad. Then I sealed the envelope. No return address. Just my name in the corner. I drove to the post office that afternoon, walked in slow, took my place in line, feeling the letter in my coat pocket like it was alive. When I handed it over to the clerk, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel sorrow. I just felt still. The way a tree might feel after a storm passes and all that's left are fallen branches and the sound of wind moving on. Back home, I sat on the porch again, Bishop at my feet. A light drizzle had started, soft and harmless, just enough to dot the railing with silver. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for a reply. This wasn't about getting a response. This was about reclaiming my voice in a story I helped write. She had said in her letter that she didn't expect me to walk away. What she didn't understand is I hadn't. I'd simply stopped walking toward people who kept stepping back. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted around me like time was trying to apologize, like the world was softening its tone in the absence of her voice. At first, I checked my phone every morning out of habit, waiting, hoping, imagining her name would blink across the screen. Hey, Dad. 2 words that once meant everything. But they didn't come. Not in the morning. Not at night. Not when her birthday rolled around. Not even on mine. The silence, once sharp, dulled into something almost familiar. Not easier, but quieter. I stopped reaching for it like a wound and started walking past it like an old photograph on the wall. Still there, still part of the story, but no longer demanding space in the present. I heard they moved. Talia and Malcolm. Into a 2-bedroom on 4th Street, close to downtown. Someone mentioned it at the grocery store, an old friend of hers from high school who didn't know everything that had happened. Saw Talia the other day, she'd said, smiling like we were still one unit. She looked tired, but happy. Married life, right? I smiled back, nodded like I didn't taste ash in the back of my throat. I didn't ask for details. Didn't want to know what color the walls were, or whether they hung wedding photos in the hallway. Part of me knew they hadn't. Not because they were trying to protect me, but because there was nothing worth framing. No aisle walk. No choreographed father-daughter moment. No toast from the man who raised her. I imagined her wedding album as a skeleton, pages waiting for memories that never arrived. I didn't hold it against her anymore. That surprised me. But healing has a strange way of moving in slow and without warning. One morning, I woke up and didn't feel the sting in my chest. One afternoon, I passed a bride and her father on the sidewalk, and instead of looking away, I smiled at them. A real smile. A warm one. I started reading again. Picked up fishing. Found myself spending hours in the garden, fingers in the dirt, coaxing things to bloom that I used to forget to water. Peace didn't come like a tidal wave. It came like a steady tide, returning each day to smooth the sand a little more. I started talking to people again. Neighbors. Old friends. Not about the wedding. Not about the letter. Not even about Talia. Just about life. Tomatoes. The weather. The books I found at the thrift store. And they didn't pry. They just welcomed me back like a man returning from a long walk in the dark. There was a man I met at the lake one morning, Daniel, widower, Vietnam vet. We fished side by side in silence until one day he asked, "You got kids?" I thought about lying. Then I said, "I did. Still do, I guess." He didn't press. Just nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. It's strange how a life can shrink and still feel full. I used to measure mine by events, by milestones, by the next thing I could give her, the next way I could be useful. Now I measured it in smaller ways. Morning light through the kitchen window. The sound of Bishop's paws on the hardwood. The smell of rain on dry earth. A letter from the city reminding me to trim the hedges. Things that didn't ask me to be anyone else. Things that didn't need me to prove my worth. There were still moments, of course. Quiet ones. Sudden ones. Like the day I found the shoebox of old birthday cards in the back of the closet. Ones she'd made as a kid, crayon hearts and stick figure drawings, these always backward. I sat on the floor for an hour, holding each one like a tiny flame, letting the warmth reach me without letting it burn. I didn't cry. Not then. I'd done my crying in earlier chapters. This was different. This was remembrance. A kind of soft reverence for the love that had once wrapped itself around me like a blanket. She never responded to my letter. Not with another one. Not with a call. But I don't think I expected her to. Some bridges don't burn. They just erode. Quietly. Over time. Until one day, you stand where the planks used to be and realize you can't see the other side anymore. But I left my door unlocked. Still do. I don't mean literally. I lock up at night, of course. But the metaphorical door? It stays open. Just in case. In case one day she remembers the man who showed up. The man who stayed long after it stopped being easy. The man who gave her more than money and logistics and contracts. The man who gave her presence. The man who gave her time. I don't know what kind of father I am in her mind now. I don't get to control that. Maybe I'm the one who withdrew, who bailed on the wedding. Maybe she tells herself it was necessary, that she had no choice, that I was too rigid. People rewrite things when they need to survive the consequences of their choices. I've done it too. But I also know what I gave her. I know what I stood for. And more importantly, I know what I refused to become. I didn't become bitter. I didn't become a cautionary tale. I didn't become the father who begged or threatened or made scenes. I became someone who chose dignity over desperation. Someone who chose peace over performance. And in that choice, I became something else too. I became mine again. It's strange how a role you held for decades can slip away, not in a scream, but in a whisper. One day you're the center of someone's world. The next, you're a shadow they only acknowledge when the light hits just right. But even shadows come from something real. And I was real. My love, my sacrifices, my consistency, they were real, whether they framed it or not. Sometimes, when I walk Bishop at night, I pass the street where we used to live, all three of us, back when things were simpler, when bedtime stories were the biggest part of our routine. The house looks the same. Same porch light. Same squeaky gate. I don't stop. I don't linger. But I let the memory touch me lightly before I keep walking. I don't need them to apologize. Not anymore. The apology would have mattered once, sure. But now? Now I just want to live the rest of my days as someone who chose himself without losing the capacity to love. I want Talia to live a full life, even if I'm not in the photo albums. Even if she only tells half the story when people ask. And if she ever calls, if that name ever blinks across my phone again, I'll answer. I will. I won't say, I told you so. I won't demand anything. I'll say, hey, kiddo, and I'll let the silence that follows carry the weight it deserves. But I won't bend. Not because I'm hard, but because I'm finally whole. I was her father. Until I wasn't. Now? Now I'm just a man who learned the difference between being there and being needed. A man who finally knows that showing up doesn't mean standing still while someone else paints you invisible. Now I'm just me. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough.